Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hey guys, welcome to Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're here with Conrad. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yep, I'm Conrad. I'm a third year philosophy, politics, and economics student at Trinity.
Nice. And today we're going to be talking about exam revision tips for humanities. So Conrad, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to preface this by saying this isn't, what's worked for me. I'm not preaching the gospel, although I will, without sort of kind of bragging, do have a pretty good academic record, and like I test well. And the reason I test well is not really because of any specific exam technique or like kind of way of revision, but kind of the way I think and approach exams, kind of my exam philosophy. You could get a lot of exam advice from students, from teachers, like online. I assume the reason you're here is because you kind of want to hear about the things that we did, things that are different. And so the things I'm going to be talking about are really like exam philosophy, how to approach exams, how to think about exams, and then how to apply this in order to get the really, really kind of best grades. And it's kind of going to start with at least my personal 3 rules of exams. So the first one and the most important one, and this is the thing I'm really going to flesh out, is you don't do economics A level, you don't do history A level, you don't do maths A level. You do Edexcel Economics A 2015 brackets B, or OCR maths, whatever the specific code is. Every single unique specification is the thing that you're really examined on, and not maths, not a subset of maths. It's really important to think of exams as a criteria game, and this is my second rule. People often say exams are just a memorization game. I think it's only partially true. I think if all you did was sit there and memorize everything you needed to know in many exams, that would land you an okay mark. But I think that all exams is they are a criteria game. In order to allow exams to be standardized fairly and universally and fairly marked, they have to be produced according to a very specific criteria, and in turn the exams written according to a very specific criteria. And if you can learn what that criteria is, if you can learn precisely what the examiners are looking for, why the questions are written, you can have a sort of really good go at approaching each exam. And so for me, the final thing to conclude on is there is no such thing as a universal strategy. So if you're really looking for a kind of specific revision technique, program, a kind of keto, but for exams, like you're not going to get that from me. But what you are going to get is kind of like a way to think about and approach exams that I think kind of really should be taught and really should be stressed and emphasized. And obviously, why is this important? I'm sure many of you, especially if you're watching an Oxford from the Inside podcast, are probably doing like reasonably all right, without the need to suddenly learn loads of exam philosophy. I think if you're really, really hard at working and it doesn't cost you anything, fair enough, feel free to switch off. Or if you don't really want kind of very best grades, but I think for me, I'm fundamentally kind of lazy, or at least I was before the kind of reality of third year hit. But I was both lazy and still wanted like the best grades, and that meant I had to be really kind of clinical and think about exams in order for me to be able to pull off both of those things at once. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I think this is really about. Like, I think this is about ensuring that you can do the best without actually having to sit there and do loads and loads of strenuous work, kind of boring yourself and stressing yourself out. Yeah. So because of that, like I wrote, I'm basing kind of my student reviews name out, but I kind of wrote a post on this. I kind of called it clinical revision. And it really comes down to a number of things. And I'll explain the importance of these as I go along. But the first one is like know the basics of your exam, know your exam board, know the number of papers, know what each paper is about, understand the mark breakdowns, the course name, stuff that might sound useless, but it's kind of just administratively really useful in order for you to be able to get the right resources, in order for you to be thinking about the important like things to do in an exam. Honors that I met a lot of people who didn't know like what exam board they were doing like the day of the exams, and like that's just kind of bad because it really means the way that you've been revising isn't tailored, isn't specific enough. And I think The first kind of important thing is like this word is like criteria, and it's a really, really big one. And it means a lot of different things in a lot of contexts. It first of all kind of means the broad theme that the overall like thing is getting you at, both like the conceptual theme, what I want you to go for. So like, I did a, history, all of the units I did were about revolutions. And like, kind of the criteria there is these were really important events. Like they want you to understand why it happened, and like, what the consequences were. And like just knowing that alone, like already gave you really important information there. The things that are going to get you marks aren't being able to restate what happened. The things that are going to get you marks are going to be stating why things happened and what the consequences were. And so that's just one kind of really simple level of what this word criteria means. There's kind of a second level, which kind of applies to the really specific competencies that each exams are looking for. And these are the kind of things you'll find in the examiner's report. So a good example is, I don't know if government and politics still do it anymore, but the old A2 spec that I did threw about this word synapticity, which meant almost nothing to me beforehand, and I've never heard it anywhere else since. But like the idea was, for every given political issue, particularly in the US, because it was the year 13 US spec, there's always two sides of a debate, and they really want students to appreciate this. And so like being able to state, however, a lot of other people disagree for X reason, was something that, while it seemed kind of important for loads of other humanities subjects, being able to do this was actually going to land you way more marks for government and politics. And so like this is kind of the idea, every different subject will weight these different competencies differently, and like kind of being able to read your examiner's report and know what these things are is really important and lets you know what's kind of going to work. And then there's kind of a third level of criteria, and this really comes down to question by question. So like on one level, there's the literal mark breakdown, which is, I think, extremely important criteria to know, because it tells you exactly what you need to do for each type of question in order to answer it. My economics A level, the Edexcel A specification would literally have like multiple types of questions, like 5 markers, 8 markers, 10 markers, 12 markers, 15 markers, and 25 markers. And for each of them, they tell you like, we allocate these marks according to knowledge, evaluation, analysis, and examples, and would give you these specific breakdowns, like, 8 marker, 2 of each, 10 marker, you get 2 extra for analysis and evaluation, and things like that. And knowing that is really, really useful criteria, because it literally means like, yeah, I can write 2 single bullet points of knowledge, a single response of analysis, a single reason why it might not be true, or why is it significant, a single example, do that twice over, and that's 8 out of 8. That's a perfect answer answered in literally 2 sentences. And like, you could be confident doing this, as opposed to the kind of usual sense of, is this enough? I don't know. Like, if you know exactly what you're doing in that question, you are confident doing it and answer it. Another level of thinking what to do in each question is understanding how each are marked. So in the economics example, like they outright told you, sometimes, they're not as explicit, but they will kind of always like tell you the things that get ticks and the things that don't. Really good example was GCSE physics. I didn't like, I didn't find it particularly hard. I just really found it boring. But like the mark scheme would base half the marks for just knowing stuff about the general subject matter in the question. And the examiner and the examiner's reports like would always say we award marks. If you ask a really specific question on light, but you kind of to new general factors about light, like they'd award you about half of the marks of the question just for that. So that meant if you were ever faced with the question you didn't know, rather than kind of panic, skip to the end, come back to it, do the usual, what am I going to do now? Literally jot down everything in a really short space of time, and you've bagged half the marks. And that's a simple little bit of strategy right there that you only get if you read the specification, read the past paper questions, and knew what they were going for. And then the final kind of thing, sort of like most complex conceptual tier of thinking about criteria in respect to specific questions, is again going back to this thing of understanding like why you're being set this question, what it aims to achieve. And this is kind of given by understanding a specific question within the context of like the specification and within the context of the competencies they're looking for. So if you'll set a history question, at least I was on what was the most important cause of like the collapse of the Berlin Wall, something like that. Alone, like, I'm sure many of you know kind of generalized advice to approach a question like that quite well. But the thing with this paper, the specific exam was, so again, this was the revolutions paper. So again, important factors like what were the revolutionary effects. But not only was this the revolutions paper, this was also the broad change over time unit. So unlike some of the other focused ones, you got credited for knowing kind of like big history. And so it's actually quite useful to understand and know some of the long-term courses. So those are some of the things you want to talk about in order to show breadth of knowledge. It's history. And so they're not only interested in evaluation, but something that kind of was mentioned in the exams reports, mentioned in like past papers, mentioned in the specification, is things like being able to understand different ways of interpreting history, which is a little bit different from evaluation, right? Evaluation might be saying scholars disagree because this is actually more significant. Whereas questions of interpretation are scholars disagree because even if they agree it's significant, they agree it's significant for a different reason. And it's just things like that, things which seem kind of small, but might be the difference between an A star and an A, might be the thing that gets you those specific marks they're looking for in order to achieve like 20 out of 25 and so on. And so when thinking about questions, it's kind of useful to have all those things in mind. For example, like the way in which the question is marked, banded questions have a lot more of these types of criteria, right? So if the mark scheme is 20 to 22 for X, 22 to 23 for X, 24 to 25 for X, it's often very different from the kind of economic example I gave where they are going to give you 4 points for different knowledge. Because it might often means that actually you might, for one subject, have to think on a more difficult conceptual level than another subject. And it's kind of really being able to do that. So those are the ways to think about criteria in terms of questions. So I've already hinted as to how to apply this to revision. What does this actually mean? So three things I've already hinted at, which are all really important: specifications, examiners' reports, past paper questions.
I just wanted to know, could you give an example of the Berlin Wall and how the different ways like the examiner wants you to answer that compared to what a student might think that they should do?
I mean, so I do think an easier example is actually going to be thinking about government politics and what I was saying about synopticity, for example, right? If you got a question which was something along the lines of, I'm trying to remember what I did in year 13. If you got something along the lines of oh gosh, sorry, it's been absolutely ages. I'm just trying to remember any of my units. Oh yeah, okay. If you got a question something along the lines of are the courts too powerful? Is the judiciary far too powerful? Like a good student is going to know, oh, I know, all of the kind of reasons why, it's far too powerful. And they may give what they believe to be a really strong reason kind of why it's not, the existence of checks and balances, but then come back with another reason why it's kind of too powerful. And those reasons might not be necessarily interrelated, but they might reflect kind of strong, independent, cohesive reasons. The problem was this synopticity requirement that's specifically listed in at least the specification that I did was about understanding two sides of specific policy issues, that issues in the US are really highly partisan. So for example, what you could have done instead was taking checks and balances rather than compare checks and balances with another reason why actually they're not powerful is, what do the Democrats and what do the Republicans both have to say about checks and balances? One side is going to say, actually, no, they're just not enough. The other side is going to say they are enough. And that's just a different choice of argument, right? That's kind of just saying, rather than talking about checks and balances and then, this other thing, I'm going to go for checks and balances and then different perspectives on checks and balances. But one of those things is going to get you into those higher bands because it's specifically listed in the specification as this thing that we're really looking for in particular. And it's kind of the exact same approach, right? If as I was saying with history, if listed in the specification is that we want to have people to understand big changes over time, then when it comes to picking the arguments that you're going to run with, picking the ones that show big changes over time are going to matter. And again, it comes down to do you know, I mean, this is a really nice segue, right? The most important thing, first thing, read the specification, because the specification is going to tell you all of those things. It's going to tell you like how much you need to know, kind of the basics. It's going to tell you the specific kind of competency that they're looking for. They're going to tell you like the themes that they're going for. You know, if you have a topic on like the stewards, they aren't going to expect you to know everything about the stewards. They're going to expect you to know certain things about the stewards, and that's going to tell you what those things are. And so like specification is super important, but examiner reports are also really, really important, because the examiner reports are where you're going to get some of the insight I've provided about kind of like what are those things that they particularly like students to do, what are those things that students kind of don't do, what are those traps, and then finally past paper questions. Both to get like a flavor of like what sort of questions you're asked, kind of to get adequate scope specification, like, you know, how broad, how narrow are these questions for each of the topics. Read past paper questions for a single topic in successive years to get like a cover of how much really within the wider topic you would need to know, like as a whole, because things after enough time will repeat. And then also just kind of use them to like practice. Make sure you're looking at answers when you're practicing them. Make sure you're referring to those examiners reports and to like past paper answers. And yeah, it's kind of things like that. And I think, you know, thinking about exams clinically isn't particularly hard to do, and it almost sounds trivial, but it makes a huge difference to the amount of kind of work that you need to do. Like a massive amount. Like I kind of have a small amount to say, both about like specific stuff about like how to think about planning, exams, personalization. Do you have any questions beforehand, before kind of like on what I've said, before we move on?
Not any questions, but I guess like, would I be right in saying that? So, like, say you've got a question, like an exam question, and I know it's about going back to the Berlin Wall, and you know, out of the exam, there's about tens of ways that you can approach that question. But and you know, if you're really talented, you could provide a really good answer that'd be convincing to someone. But I guess the difference about an exam is what you're saying, that if you look at the exam, the correct specification and the examiner's report, so you can see what is that what they actually want, rather than even if what you could produce would be really good, that might not.
Well, exactly. Like there are kind of two things that are important that you just said there. The first one is like, exams aren't about writing great answers. It's about writing great answers according to a really specific specification that has been written, most likely by a couple of blokes, a couple of individuals, a couple of people who decided for random, like arbitrary reasons, in order to ensure this exam is fair and standardized and universal, we need to have these as our go-to criteria, because we understand that people could show intellectual flair by doing other things, but that, you know, makes it a little bit too difficult to standardize. You know, most of the people watching this are going to be A-level and GCSE students. You don't need to be writing university style essays. So kind of appreciating that alone prevents you from being like it just lets you know what's good. Like what you need to do. But the second thing is kind of really important. There are so many different ways to approach question, and exams can be really kind of terrifying. And you can often feel kind of like you're in deep. You need to learn all these things. And being able to know what's useful, what's needed, kind of both thematically, but also like practically, both like this is actually like what it says it wants, you know, this is how many marks it is in this question, though this is how much I actually need to write, kind of reduces all of those fears. So much so, you know, at least I remember for economics that, you know, the top students were literally writing 4 lines for like 12-mark questions, and they were confident because they knew exactly what required. Like, it's kind of this sort of thing. It's just kind of useful as a matter of confidence, both for yourself, but also, yeah, all exams are really a criteria game. That's absolutely right.
Is that in as short as possible? Is that the same for university from your experience?
I mean, like, you know, I mean, yeah, university exams are a little bit weird, a little bit different. But like at the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing, right? In order to set an exam that can be equally marked by everyone, fairly marked for everyone, like there need to be things that the kind of university are looking for in each. And so like to some extent, they are going to be wanting like to see you understand what the basic academic field for a given topic looks like. They're always going to be wanting you to see actually like demonstrate a couple of sort of back and forth to show you understand what the debate looks like. They're always going to have this original thought requirement, which really just means, have you provided anything novel, you know, kind of be it just like conceptualization, argumentation, like characterization. So there are always going to be things that's kind of not, you can go into an like exam being like, these are kind of the things that I should be attempting to do in this essay. It's kind of not as clear cut you aren't going to get, we're going to award this many marks for having this many points at university essays. But I do think, for example, if you read exams reports year on year in particular, they will often say things like students are repeatedly missing this, for example, students are repeatedly showcasing not enough knowledge or knowledge only from the lecture material. And that also really does differ from exam to exam, like paper to paper. I've seen some paper, for example, practical ethics, at least for PPE, is a lot more explicit about how much they like original thought and original ideas and original thinking, whereas normal ethics kind of appreciate like that's not needed as much. Like we want people to have like an interesting approach you can take, but you don't need to come out with, completely massive and new argument. I've read individual papers where they explicitly say, we actually really liked the fact that advanced papers and theories of justice, for example, I read an exams report where they came out saying we liked the fact that students weren't mentioning the typical thinkers, they were mentioning all these like contemporary theorists. Whereas others aren't too concerned with what you'd like to do, right? I've read an exams report where they say this is a really vital piece of information, or even we wish students mentioned this more. And like you only get those perspectives from reading the exams reports. You could be an amazing student who like thinks, oh yeah, I know all of the big names, like I can write a sick essay. And then you go doing so, kind of get a high 2-1, mid 2-1. You wonder why you can get a first class. And it's because actually what you think is good enough in terms of like the original thought requirement, they're expecting more in a certain paper. So I absolutely think like the element of thinking about each exam like in itself, like as its own beast requiring its own unique set of criteria, holds true of every single exam, humanities, like university, postgrad, whatever, is absolutely true. It's just some of the more practical stuff is obviously easier to apply at A-level and GCSE, and it's a little bit harder to kind of work those things out at university level, but I think the fundamentals are absolutely true.
No, sure. You said you had a few more things.
Oh yeah, kind of just sorry, I'm getting so kind of just a couple of things on both like personalization, which I think is less kind of novel but kind of worth stressing. In light of being really clinical about how you approach exams, you also need to kind of apply the same mindset to yourself. You will have different strengths, different weaknesses, and tailoring your revision around those is extremely important. And like people kind of already know what that means, but it does mean, for example, spending more time on your weaknesses. It does mean adjusting specific revision techniques to specific weaknesses you have. I think a good combination, and probably where I realized that I'd cracked how to do exams, I just need to give this anecdote, is my French GCSE. So languages have never been intuitive to me. Of all the GCSEs I did, it was one of the ones I found hardest. And writing wasn't intuitive to me either, but I knew the way that writing was, I knew first of all I need to spend more time thinking about this, but also I knew the way that it was marked. And there were kind of two weird elements about how it was marked, which is, so I have notes then. So firstly, like for the writing, the mark breakdown would give you loads of marks for complex phrases, things like one could agree that. And they'd also give you separate marks for tenses. So for my writing exams, I literally Googled cool French phrases, found 10 that were in every single tense, and then literally wrote those down, memorized them, and made sure I put them into anything I was writing about, because that would get me 20 out of 30, I think, already. And then also for like speaking was my absolute worst. But the interesting thing about the way that the speaking was marked was they only marked you on responses to your oral presentation. So you'd give this 2-minute oral presentation, not marked, be asked questions and you were marked. So what I did was I wrote a really narrow, tailored presentation. It was like problems to do with the environment in order to anticipate the questions that I would be asked in turn. And then because I knew this was something I needed to spend a lot of time on, spent ages learning those answers. So yeah, I had a great speaking exams. I came across as significantly more fluent than I ever could be. And like that's kind of the idea, like spending more time on those things that I needed to, but doing so in a way that shows kind of real care and consideration about the way that the exams are marked and written. And like, so I think that's just kind of the way I think about personalization. Final thing is just how I think people should approach revision. Don't really have too much to say other than two main things. First of all, revision needs to be goal-oriented, which is really important, but like doesn't go said enough. I think if you're thinking about constructing a revision timetable or thinking about building like a long-term revision plan, make sure it's goal-oriented. Make sure it's not, I'm revising this amount every single day. It's two things. It's have a like long-term plan of when you want to know things by a certain week, when you want to cover things by a certain week. And in your short-term revision timetable, aim to cover a certain amount in each session. That's going to be so much more useful, both for you like confidence-wise, both for you like feel like you know what you need to do, but also making sure you don't miss gaps. It forces you to do some of those boring administrative things like writing down all your topics, making sure you like know what all your topics are. It forces you to think in the way that you've done, like blah blah blah, like so in the way that I've been saying, you know, blah blah blah. Like it's kind of the right approach, and you want to do it both long term and the short term. And finally, like a repetition is also more important when you're constructing kind of like a long-term revision plan or short-term revision time. It's more important to cover more material in a short space of time, but revisit it, than it is to kind of space out your revision, but cover like everything. If that makes sense. Like if you have a choice between a revision timetable that is like 20-minute fragments of all your material in 2 weeks, or spending like an hour doing in-depth research, but you only cover it once before your exam, the former is going to be useful. But I will say, given what I've said about personalization, kind of only take that as true as much as it applies to you. Just 9 out of 10 times that will be useful for both making sure you really understand it, giving you the opportunity and space to actually improve every time you visit a topic, which is particularly useful for humanities, and making sure you are able to fill in any gaps. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I have to say. I'm like happy to take any questions though.
No, nice, thank you. That was amazing. That was pretty, yeah, that was pretty insane. Yeah, just so much, like, just like, yeah, like, no BS, but pure gold.
Yeah, I think exams don't have to be scary, and like I think, at least ever since cracking it with my French GCSE, I haven't found them scary, and yeah, I kind of hope I can share that with as many others.
No, yeah, I can. Thinking back to GCSEs, I can actually, now thinking about it more because it's such a long time ago, I can really resonate with that, with my experiences. I I think in terms of like, I know, being like, I don't think I'm. I know I was not worldly clever at all until like, and I was a bit more aware of the world, I'd say now, but my exam results did not replicate that. My exam results looked like, oh, this guy knows everything. And I remember my approach. I mean, as far as GCSE results and A-level results can say about a person, but I remember, yeah, my behaviour in class was, would have an exam, like a test, and I would look at the grade boundaries and like the little bits next to it that explaining what you need to do, and I'd read it, and any words I don't understand. So like if I didn't understand what I needed to do, I was asked the teacher, and until I exactly knew what I needed to do, and then just do it. And if it didn't work, I'd come back to the teacher and said, I did what you did. Like, what happened? And then just like obviously I didn't do it right, and they'll explain why, and staying there until I understood what went wrong. And sometimes, yeah, I mean, sometimes teachers don't want to mark you well, and sometimes I didn't do well. It happened, swings and roundabouts. But no, yeah, I can fully resonate with that.
Yeah, I think one feeling everyone gets in every single exam is the vibe that if all you had to revise was like this topic or this subject, or you only had one exam, it feels so easy, but all the difficulty comes from the fact that you have to do 13, at least in my case, a GCSE, 3, 4 A levels, or like so many papers at university is where the difficulty comes from. But like a part of me thinks, if you really kind of consider each paper like in its own beast, the amount that you need to do per paper drastically narrows down to the point where actually kind of being able to hit top marks on all of each of them looks feasible. And so like, again, it's why I've been stressing kind of like a confidence like aspect of all of this. I think there's a degree to which having a kind of universal approach to exams in general makes you so much more inefficient and just makes them seem scarier. And like you being more inefficient does actually make them scarier because they are literally harder, because here you are trying to do like all of this learning. The truth is, in terms of actual material, I've dedicated very little time to learning of material. I'm awful at rote learning. I'm awful at sitting there Not even memorization. I can do. I just find it horrendously boring. I've never been able to sit there for hours on end. Most of the effective revision I do is things like just writing essays, things like thinking, things I find fun. But the reason I've been able to do that is because I have developed the ability to really kind of know what is a right amount to learn per exam, or like how much I can get away with not knowing. I want to say something I've kind of missed, just because every teacher has told me not to do this and I've not followed their advice. But the predictive element of doing all of this is pretty astounding. For GCSE history and A-level history, I predicted every non-source-based question to the point where the days before the exam, I wrote model answers to what I thought were going to come up, and they all came up. And like I was predicting questions left, right, and centre for every single GCSE and A-level I did that was humanities focused. Purely because I'd read all the past papers, I knew the thematic and conceptual elements. Like I had such a strong sense of what could come up, that like I didn't need to therefore be the guy sitting there learning for hours on end. So like as much as this kind of all sounds like it's very sweaty and sort of high level, I personally at least think this is the easier, lazier approach. But yeah, that's me.
I can definitely see how like with anything, if it's an approach that the majority aren't doing, it seems a bit scary to go against the tides. But everything that you've said, you've backed up.
I mean, I wouldn't recommend banking what I did, which is only learning the stuff that I predicted. It takes quite a lot of confidence, but I at least I would recommend you kind of being clinical in the way that I've been on about.
No, for sure. So can you what was your give us a whistle stop tour of your experiences of using what you've said from GCSEs till now? Like anything, is there anything that you've missed out that were quite key?
Oh, whistle stop tour. I mean, yeah, I think the examples I've given have been good. Yeah, what I will talk about actually is, so I've given kind of load examples about how to apply this sort of things, but in terms of how this affects my overall revision strategy, yeah. So for example, A-level, one question people always start is, when should you start revising? But if you kind of haven't got the gist of this whole entire spiel, it depends on the subject, depends on you. So a very specific feature of the government and politics A-level in year 13 was that they'd vary the questions far more than any other A-level I'd ever seen. They'd seem to ask different takes on the same topic, way more so than anything I'd come across. But it doesn't really matter, because the synopticity requirement meant often for a given topic, you could just be one perspective on this, however, and kind of take an argument that was similar a bit. So let's say this is the first time they asked the question about restricting voting rights, but you vaguely know from your other topics that Republicans are against that sort of thing. So it's always possible to say one response to this is that it's a restriction of freedom. So the actual learning of the content, in terms of the arguments, in terms of hitting this synopticity requirement, wasn't a problem. What it did mean was all the facts that you'd need to know might vary quite a lot. So the very earliest formal revision I did in year 13, once identified this, was about January. So halfway through still my learning, we were allowed laptops in class. I stopped paying attention to the teacher, because the stuff that he was talking were all the things I knew you could kind of come up with to meet those synopticity marks. And I started making a list of facts for every single past paper question, in the hope that that would be enough to cover what might come next. I didn't learn them, but knowing what they were allowed me to basically, I don't want to say make them up, but cram kind of as many as I could, have a gist of what sort of facts would apply, kind of be a little bit liberal or loose. But the point was, come exam time, I was way more confident in what sort of facts I might need to know than anyone else, irrespective of whether I actually took the effort to sit there and learn them. I learned quite a few through the process of just kind of making them anyway. I'm not going to lie, that I do have an okay memory, thus my lack of need to sit there and memorize. But that's kind of one example, right? So this was the very first formal revision I took, was in identifying this thing a year in advance. I realized actually the thing that was most useful for politics required me to spend ages doing this really extensive, really boring work. But that's because actually, once I knew that I could hit kind of all of these marks kind of quite easily, doing this thing, which I stopped doing in May, was going to set me completely straight. And so I didn't start other topics until later. History, most of my effective revision was creating past paper questions. for the reasons I've said, I was pretty strong, confident in what would come up because I just knew the course thematically so well. And I knew the way it was marked. It was marked in bands according to some of the criteria that I've said. So I kind of had a rough sense of what an okay essay looked like. Economics, I started a little bit earlier than, that's not true, no, that's a lie. Economics, I didn't start that early at all because the economics course, at least that I did, awarded marks so easily, and 90% of the marks they awarded, essentially analysis evaluation marks, were for being able to, well, for things that you could think of on the spot, right? Things like what's the benefit of growth? What's the cost of unemployment? And so I didn't revise any of those things in the textbook, and that led me to revise facts, except I didn't need to revise that many facts because I knew that facts were only ever like 4 out of 25 marks, like at max, something like that. So economics was one of my sort of least like intensive. Maths, I'm not gonna lie, I can't. Maths, physics, actually what I said about physics GCSE, so it's still possible. Maths, I didn't really do it because there's not much I could do other than loads of practice papers. Maths isn't as easily gameable, I'm afraid. You know, this is primarily humanities talk. But I think that's kind of like a rough sense of how in the space of a year I kind of approached each topic. And like, I think at university, I'm very much doing the same. Every single paper, to be honest, every single topic that I do within each paper, you identify themes in the examiner's reports for each of them, and like identifying those themes and identifying the kind of patterns you see in past paper questions means my strategy right now is to write representative past paper questions. So pick the past papers that I think are most likely to be transferable to the topics I think are going to come up, and just write past papers for those, not in timed conditions. I'm not doing anything in timed conditions until much closer to time. I'm using this as an opportunity to like fill in as many gaps as possible. And it's like, this is kind of the idea, like I kind of know what I'm doing for each paper. I can't really speak to whether it's going to work at university because, you know, I haven't done my exams yet, and, you know, I might completely fail, in which case, like, if you're watching this after I have failed, don't listen to me. But like, yeah, I think this is definitely just now a kind of rote way that I think about any sort of test that I do. And like, it's worked for me in the past. It worked for me first year of university, even though I did have a little bit of mare with economics. But again, that's kind of maths, and hopefully it works again. But I've at least, I can attest to that. You know, this has helped me.
No, yeah, I mean, obviously, because I do chemistry and maths and further maths A level, it's strange. Like, yeah, in some ways, you can maths like, I don't know what the new A levels are like now, but I imagine it's fairly similar. But you can massively game them in the sense that past papers is king. Who's done the more past papers will more likely do well. But then the thing that you can't skip is, yes, like, it's basically a method and you just do it 100 times and then you can do it. But if you don't understand how to do the methods, that part, I don't know how you cut corners. Like,
I mean, like, that's true.
Like, you just that initial bit of, you gotta grab your teacher and just be like, this right here, I don't understand, and then get them to click it for you, and then the past papers. But because it's not like, because it's the uni maths isn't like that at all. It's much less gameable. Then it's not just a rote past papers. It's a bit more flexible. One thing I wanted to say was back before we were saying about approaching exams, thinking about them all at once. Something I really resonate with that is, so I know my GCSEs alongside lots of students here, they were pretty good, and I realised in hindsight, looking back, I never planned or aimed to get like, I was never aiming for 11 A stars. That was never a thought that went through my mind. How I approached it, just sort of naturally, it was just so much more, as you said, like less stressful. Was each subject I would be doing, I would be aiming for an A star. Like, I'll get the grade boundaries, and I'll look at the top, and I'd aim for that. And obviously at the beginning you'd get somewhere in the middle and you just keep climbing up, and then you've done French, whatever, and then you moved on to history, and then you do the same, and then if you do that enough, and it's definitely a lot, it's a lot less stressful, because if you're thinking of 11, that's a lot, but if you think one at a time, by the end you've got almost 11, or like and you achieve something that,
and I think so literally perfectly described every single exam experience that I've ever had. Because I had moments both in the mirror and also on results day. And also like before and after I'd done my exams, I'd be like, well, yeah, I feel like for each exam, there's kind of no reason why I couldn't get an A star. Like, I'm looking at just this. I'm focusing on you, like edX Early Economics A 2015. And like, this is an A star. I'm doing the same. But then I think, wait, that's going to end up being like all of these A stars for both GCSEs and A-level. Like, that seems a little bit ridiculous. But like the kind of ridiculousness of it didn't put me off, only because I'd done those sort of individual things first. Like I'd got to a point where I realized that the thing that does put people off is taking that like holistic approach first and be like, no, there's no way I can like kind of bag all of this. Like, as I say, like if people always are already saying like GCSE would be so easy, if you only had one, like, well, you kind of, yeah, I guess time-wise, it's going to stretch you thin. But other than time, like each GCSE is one, like the difficulty hasn't changed. And yeah, I think thinking about it that way is just kind of, again, like even if just a confidence boost of being like, I can do it, like useful.
I mean, there's two things that come to mind that are quite important about that. Is that one of them is, I think we all know, like with like, I know our GCSEs would be easier if there was less, but then, and I think the situation, like the grass seems to always look greener, and like
Yeah.
I think whatever, end of the day exams are exams, and I think, and I know it's part of British culture as well. Put that in there. We're always going to find a way to complain and like think that it could be easier. I think, yeah, like I think if it was easier and we lived in that situation, we'd still say the same thing and find something else that could have been easier.
Yeah.
Just like, I think if you have a feeling that it's a shame that it wasn't this because it'd be easier, sometimes those arguments are really valid, but either way they don't help. Like you are in the situation that you're in, and it's like you spend more time. It's a bit harsh advice, but you spend more time getting on with it rather than complaining. That's like a pinch of salt argument, obviously. Like if you come, like if it's affecting your welfare massively, then obviously don't advise. Like take it there, all the pinch of salt with that. And the other thing that wants to say was I really resonate with what you were saying about the goals orientated timetable, because so for me, so with my exams right now, and I've done this every single time for any exam. I did this for when I was preparing for interviews, and I took it quite extreme, quite hardcore. Not necessarily, but I like wanted to know a certain amount of things by the interviews. So like with these exams coming up, these finals, I've gone through the exams and written out a list of topics that keep coming up. Some of them, they tell you these are the topics you're going to be examined on. The other ones you got to sort of work it out. I've got a list of got a list of dates for Sunday. So it's like end of Sunday, like by end of Sunday, and then all of them listed out. And then just got this list of topics and just sort of at first, because I mean, doing it like carefully takes a lot of time, but just sort of fitting them in wherever at first. So getting this large amount of topics I need to get done, and then putting them in by each week, that by this week I've got to do this. And then once you've like, that's 60% of the timetable done. Now you've actually got to make it realistic, make sure you're making time to consolidate. Because if you just revise, something in the first week and then never revisited it and never plan to do that, you got to like plan to revisit it. And I think the great thing, I think my main point is that if you write out everything that you need to do by the exams and then also have a plan between now and your exams, you can see like months ahead that if you don't do what you do, like what you're planned to do today, you can see that you're behind like in 4 months, like because you know that if you continue to do this, then by the time the exam days come, you're gonna have to you're gonna like not do everything that you wanted to. And for me, and that's also okay. Like for me, every exam that I've ever done, to some extent, was damage limitation. I don't think like I wouldn't. That's not something I would advocate for. But for me, I mean, damage limitation is my personal way of like describing it. But I mean, damage limitation bit worked, and I did quite well so far. So in the sense that it came to the exam, and I was banking on certain things because time was getting short, and I had to focus my attention to certain things.
Exactly.
And yeah, as you were saying, throughout the whole thing. But I do think having like the list of like the amount of time that you've got between now and your exams and all your topics and splitting them accordingly, because then you can see quite quickly that, oh, there's too much, and you're gonna have to choose right now, because if you try to do all, you can quite clearly see that there's not enough time, which is also quite fair.
It's so useful. I mean, I kind of do. I'm not going to quite share my screen, but I kind of want to run through. I have a strategy sheet, like what that looks like and why it's so useful. It's like on sheet 1, I have 8 papers for PPE. I wrote down every single topic that I've ever done for each of them. I know that in the exams, I will only have to learn 3. I looked at the past paper questions for every single paper to see how confident that I am that I would be able to answer like a random 3. And for all of them bar 2, I was reasonably confident actually I wouldn't struggle with them. And so for those ones, I chose 4 topics out of everything I was learning, highlighted them. For the 2 topics I was less confident, I chose 5 topics, highlighted them, added up to a total of about 33 topics. On the next sheet, I just wrote down those 33 topics. And on top of that, have a week by week calendar as to when I'm going to like want to learn the things by. And the sheet afterwards is there for the day-to-day calendar. But what the goal-oriented looks like is I'm going to I'm going to have written an essay or essay plan for this topic, and in turn made sure I cover all of the kind of basic like gaps. And so like that's kind of what it looks like. But already within that, it's allowed me to know exactly what I'm going to be doing going into each exam. B, it's also allowed me to have a really good sense of what my strengths and weaknesses are. So I know that the days I do this, I might need to, for example, not have something on in the evening because I need to spend more time on it, right? Like things like that. And as you said, if things are looking like actually this is kind of not possible, or no, this isn't working, it lets you change around things and rejig so easily. Like another confession is I'm awful at following a revision timetable. I followed one revision timetable in my entire life. And that was, I think, Easter of year 12 for 4 marks. And I remember it because I was like, oh, I actually followed a revision timetable. But like, it doesn't matter. I have them anyway, because it's so easy for me to rejig and keep me focused the day like next, even if it's going to like fall flat and I'm going to have to like redo it again. And I think, yeah, just that confidence it instills you with, right, I have this many days, I know this, I have this to do, even if that's constantly changing, like your actual plan is changing. It's just very useful for staying on top of it. So like, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I definitely, for me, the idea of having a revision timetable that's not on like a Word document, or for me, pages on Apple,
Yeah.
is like in like I change it like
Oh yeah,
every
daily
like
for me. Yeah.
yeah, like because you know, like some days you get more done, or some days you don't get as
Yeah.
much. Like for me, like I it's not the takeaway message from Stalin's 5-year plans that you're supposed to take. But I remember when I learned about it, and I was like, oh wow, like I mean, like yeah, that from really over ambitious plans, they didn't reach them at all, but they achieved some things that no one thought they could. I mean, obviously, like the actual backstory that's important is an unbelievable amount of people died. But my point is that if you don't have a flexible revision timetable, then it's more likely you're going to give up straight away.
Yeah.
Like I think having it on a Word document or whatever, like some like if you have it written down, for me personally, it's just going to get messy so quickly because you just cross.
Yeah, like I think for me, mine aren't flexible as they're written, but my mindset is I can change them whenever I want to. Like it's less important that I stick to it than it is that I have it down, because in having it down, I've already had to do all of those things that are so useful to revision. And like it's still giving me a constant check of progress. So yeah, no, I definitely agree. Like definitely don't write it down if that's going to like stress you out. The important thing is to never have something fixed that you adhere to. It's to have in clear mind your goals, what you want to achieve when, and how close you are to doing so. Like that's kind of what it comes down to. And that's the important thing to stress.
Also, yeah, 2 things I wanted to say as well is that you can, so if you have like a few like maybe 2 things you want to get done, like 2 topics in one day, you can sort of, if you have more than one thing that you want to do, you can sort of use one of them as procrastination if you're not feeling 100%. Like if you're really, and I think when you're really in the throes of revision, you find that I mean, don't do it too much because then you realize that you're not doing that one thing that you're really struggling with. But you get to a point where you can use other revision topics as procrastination, because then you're just always getting steps further towards where you need to be. But yeah, the flip side of that is I wouldn't ignore something for too long, because then you might never do it. And the other thing was, there's this idea of Pomodoros. It's quite a pretentious name in my opinion, but I don't know if you've heard of it, but
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I have heard of it. I think the only thing I have to say on stuff like that, the reason I avoided giving revision advice like that is just because it's very kind of personal. I'm not very good at intensely focused revision, namely because I don't like doing any of the sorts of revision that require it. My perfect revision strategy is give me a day, like I can honestly behind a TV, listening to music, just kind of think and mull over an essay. And like, I'm happy with that. I'm not really keen on super efficient, but it does work for a lot of people. I think particularly people who have that problem, but do still kind of need that like intense focus, maybe they're doing like a science or just or can't, or, aren't doing sort of like isn't revising that way. Yeah. So Pomodoros technique, just for I guess people explaining it, is I mean it's kind of formulated loads of different ways, but essentially you set a timer for 20 minutes at a time, and then like a very very short break. Do that about I think it's about 4 to 6 times. If you've done it before, you might know the specifics, and then take a longer break. The idea is you're never revising for too long at a time. But within those 20 minutes, you go completely cold turkey, shut off all your browsers, shut off all your devices, do really good focused revision, but it's not too long to tire you out. Take a short break, recollect your thoughts, do that again. And before you know it, you've done an hour, 2 hours of really good revision, which for most people is better than 6 hours of mediocre revision.
Yeah.
And then you get like this break, all in a really bite-sized chunk. So that's a good revision strategy. And like that's a lot of ones teachers recommend. But yeah, like it doesn't really work for me. It doesn't really work for how I revise. But yeah, no, I think like this is something I missed when I was talking about personalization, because I mentioned strengths, weaknesses. Knowing how you revise, how you work is also another really important thing, and that comes with testing out a lot of different things. You might have a teacher who's kind of really into the boring side of this, which is, are you a visual learner? Are you like do you learn by just doing this? Do you learn by hearing? And it sounds kind of like a little bit trite, a little bit kind of like I just came back from a course, but it is actually really useful, because it will often mean you don't need to do a lot of the stuff that just wastes time. I spent far too much of my revision making flashcards in general when I kind of didn't really need to ever. That was a primary revision tactic I did for a very long time, just because it's not kind of the way I learn. But like, yeah, so testing out loads of different methods like the Pomodoro method is very useful, because once you know how you learn best, that's again a matter of efficiency. You don't need to waste your time, feeling bored, stressing yourself out, doing the things that aren't helping. So I definitely recommend giving yourself leeway to experiment, and then like once you find what stick with it, like go for it.
Nice, yeah. I think I'll just share my experiences with Pomodoros. I fully before that do strongly advocate for, like, this is not the gospel, like finding your like personal way to revise for sure. But for me, there's a few benefits that I've found for Pomodoros. Is that it's it's really helpful for when you're going from zero to starting. So if you're like not doing any, if you're starting to revise and you've got this huge mountain to climb, doing 25 minutes isn't that daunting. And how I structure my days, and like how serious you take the 25 minutes is up to you as well. Like some say like, yeah, cold turkey, like nothing at all, like no computers, no, like just the work. For me, it's just 25 minutes of productivity, like of work, and it's not too serious. And when the timer turns off, I see that as when say there's a timer and it goes off and my 25 minutes are done, I see that as I've got permission, I guess, to stop. But if I'm in a stream of like in the flow, I'll keep going like 5 more minutes. And if I kept going for another like 20, then I would count it as 2. And the main thing that I found really helpful is that I'm someone who likes to-do lists, and like I get that dopamine release of taking something off my to-do list. And every day I'll start the day and I'll have like a number, like a Word document, like on my lists, and it might say like 15, like I want to do 15 Pomodoros today, and after I do each one, I would take it down to 14, 13, etc., and it just, working for loads of hours a day is just a daunting idea. Like that's just like, you think about it, it's like that's just quite a lot. And even like working for like, the idea of like I'm going to sit down and work for 3 hours, like that for me, that's quite a daunting task. But just doing one Pomodoro at a time, and then I like, and the idea is never to actually get zero. If I get zero, that's great, and I'll go to -1, -2. But it's just getting like, just doing one at a time. It's the idea of, instead of approaching exams as like you want to get 11 or 11 or 12 all A stars, just at one at a time. I definitely think it makes the you're sitting down, you're just going to do 25 minutes of work, and that for me makes work so much less stressful. And you also feel good, because at the end of each day, for me, from 15 to like 3 or 4 or 7 or 8, it feels good to see how many I've done. And it's just like a way of, I guess, like keeping tally and getting that dopamine release of like the similar feeling of taking something off your to-do list, like ticking something off. Yeah.
Can agree more.
Obviously,
yeah. As in, like, yeah, see how that works. I think the vibe is, I think the interesting to point is precisely the specific things that you did for yourself to adjust Pomodoro, and like that is the important thing, right? That is what's going to get you through. And yeah, no.
Yeah, I think if there's anything we're going to end with, is that, I mean, yeah, this is about exams revision techniques, but pretty much any advice. But yeah, any advice anyone ever gives you, take what they've said, and when you try out yourself, change, like, and you feel like it works better when you change it subtly in your own way, then definitely do that. I think like if I was the best example that immediately comes to mind, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about, is sport. Like, sport develops because the top athletes change what everyone else is doing and do it in a slightly new way, and then 10-20 years later, that's the way now. And it's the same with like revision techniques. You might hear what we're saying, think what Conrad said is like insane, and then develop it, go a step further in a way that we haven't thought of. And you should definitely do that. Like, whatever, as you said, personalization, whatever works for you, and just cherry pick everything you hear. But yeah, but that is, unless there's anything else, Conrad, that you've got to say.
Nothing from me, unless you have any more questions. That's everything.
That's good. Yeah, that's all that we've got time for today. Thank you so much, Conrad.
No worries.
If this has helped anyone, it's definitely helped me for my revision for finals. So
no problem.
And thanks for the viewers for watching, whether it's on your podcasting platform or YouTube, Instagram. Stay safe, and good luck with the revision coming up. And we'll see you guys next time.
Cool. Take care, everyone.